Why are prices so different for the Switch 2 and its games between countries? Why are some countries particularly affected? And how will the recent tariff changes affect Nintendo's strategy in light of this? In this video, I am going to deep dive regional price variations, but firstly, one quick note on the recently announced US pause to their tariff schedule. A major issue for Nintendo of America this year is clearly going to be the management of Switch 2 supply. A 3-month reprieve from tariffs doesn't really help Nintendo as it still raises questions about the US holiday season. With a good stockpile in place, they could keep the price as announced, and if they focus on stockpiling majorly in the next period of time, they may well be able to secure their American supply until the end of the calendar year. In the Wii period, they used to start stockpiling in August for the holiday window. But if they front load that now by pulling stock from less commercially critical markets to prioritize American stockpiling, well, they may have enough, including stockpiling that they have already done, in order to make sure that they are ready for launch, to be able to offer the Switch 2 to market without incurring additional costs that might need to be passed to the consumer. Clearly, in this time, everything could be all resolved, which makes Nintendo's supply chain woes all the more frustrating. They could divert stock to the US for nothing, but more is riding on the US market than any other one outside Japan at least. Whether they stick with the price or not, I'm not sure. Diplomatically, I don't think that they can raise the price from $449 for a console that is not actively being impacted by tariffs, especially under current conditions, and if they have a good supply of the machines in train to keep costs at that level until December, even assuming the tariffs apply, then they can raise the price next year. This might even front load Switch 2 purchases in the US because of scarcity concerns, and of course this will help them greatly in building a big install base for the system for its first year. Then, if they have to raise the price in January, I think they probably would do, reflecting ongoing costs, but by this point they may well have had the time to think about a plan B, a topic which I've covered in a separate video. Now, I will circle back to the American aspects later in this video, but the purpose of this video is really to examine international pricing differentials, and the American supply arrangements need to be considered in that context. So, how are countries' prices so different for Switch 2 and its games, and why are they so different? Clearly, nobody expects every good to cost exactly the same in every country. Different currencies are stronger or weaker, transport costs are far different across dense urban populations as opposed to vast desert areas, tax regimes are not only different, but apply at different points, including pre-sale and point-of-sale charges, and in some niche markets there are other particular considerations. Still, as the Switch 2 era dawns, the picture does appear to be very mixed. These are the prices as best I have been able to identify them, but a word of caution. Finding some of these is not actually made tremendously easy by Nintendo's labyrinthine websites, which don't all follow the same standards and arrangements, and sometimes do not give price information at all. In places, therefore, I have had to use prices quoted in other places or retailers independent of Nintendo, which may not give a fair indication, may be unreliable, and of course some of the game prices I could not source at all. I also haven't exhaustively gone through Eurozone countries, although France, Switzerland and German prices all seem equivalent, though as you can see from the case of Finland, not all Eurozone countries are. If anybody has further information, clarifications or corrections, or can add information concerning other territories, please let me know in the comments, with sources if possible, and I will update the video description to reflect the current standing. Still, this table in itself probably doesn't mean much to people unless you are hyper aware of the current exchange rates, so I've also translated them into US dollars. Obviously, the exchange rates will continue to fluctuate, and so while they are accurate at the point I made the table, I make no claims for their accuracy at the point at which you're watching this video. This should give us a good basis, though, to identify some apparent oddities, but it is still imperfect. For one thing, the US price is significantly underestimated due to the decision of US retailers to apply tax at the state level at point of sale. Many other countries, especially in Europe, have this price reflected up front in the cost price as advertised. Since these sales taxes are sometimes quite significant contributors towards the price, we need to undo some of their effects to get a better idea of how the charges stack up from country to country. That gives us this table, but again, caution required. This is a difficult exercise because some countries do have variable sales taxes, and I've had to simply use what seems to be the most common one as far as I can determine. In the case of Germany, it no longer serves as a good yardstick for many other Eurozone countries because Germany's 19% value-added tax on products is less than some others. Hungary's is 27%, but it at least gives us some common ground to start a discussion. However, as I still don't find this table enormously easy to digest, I have decided to present this in a different way. This table shows the difference between the price in dollars before tax compared to the US price in dollars before sales tax, and all rounded to the nearest $10. The reason for the rounding is that given how volatile the figures are and how many different contributing factors there are which might make things a bit murky, I think it's easier to remove noise in the dataset as far as possible. It's not perfect, of course, but let's use this as a starting point. Oh, and one final change to make the chart a lot easier to read still, let's order them in terms of the price of the Switch 2 base models. Green means it's less expensive, red means it's more expensive. So this tells us that the Japanese language Switch 2 model available in Japan is $140 discounted compared to the US base price, while fans in Sweden are paying $90 more for a Switch 2. Before we dive into the consoles though, let's just have a look at game prices. I have used the physical game prices where available, and this data suggests that European and American game prices are actually equivalent where I can find data. Even in Norway, where the Switch 2 is dearer, once you adjust for other factors, the game is within a rounding error of the same price. That said, the US and European prices are consistently the most expensive. The specific territories where physical games are somewhat cheaper are Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, with South Korean gaming fans doing especially well. One explanation is that the dataset is incorrect, of course, but there are commonalities which might explain these regions' relatively benign price changes, which we'll get to shortly. Let's talk then about consoles. The same regions are basically treated quite kindly, with Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden experiencing much more severe price hikes. Still, the clear outlier is the Japanese language version of the Switch 2, which is stunningly more cheap in the scheme of these consoles. There are many reasons why I expect this decision has been taken. First of all, Nintendo has always stated on their financial reports that the major risk to their business is currency risk. Ultimately, selling into a domestic market has far fewer issues, far fewer complications, and they also have a lot more leverage to argue their case with the relevant authorities if problems do occur, because it is a major domestic corporation. More than this, it seems like an anticipatory move in advance of future exchange rate changes. Japan is aiming to strengthen the yen over the long term to help mitigate the import costs, most notably energy, while in the US the focus is on trying to weaken the dollar, the strategy apparently being to boost US industrial exports. This means that in the medium term, and Nintendo clearly want this console to be at this price for a long period if possible, this price differential is likely to look a lot smaller as the exchange rates change. Even if this doesn't happen, Japan generally accounts for between a fifth and a quarter of Nintendo's whole sales, bigger than almost any other single country apart from the USA. Their developer pool comes from Japan, and so they need to keep the profile and reputation of the company extremely high, which is very hard if Japanese consumers don't come on board early and in big numbers. They will aspire for many Japanese indie developers, especially, or third-party companies with young staff, to pick up the console and see its potential. One note I have seen raise the fact that the median Japanese household earns roughly $52,000, while the median US household earns around $80,000. That said, many other items in Japan are more affordable, notably food and utilities. The website Romancing Japan estimates the Japanese cost of living is around 55% lower than the US. I don't think Nintendo particularly takes cost of living context into account when determining their price, but that's a topic for another video. Either way, when you set off the lower Japanese wages against the higher American prices, things are pretty much even Stevens. As for Australia, in 2015, the country signed the Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement, JAPA, which gives extremely preferential treatments and trade terms for the two countries. New Zealand also signed an extensive partnership with the country, which came into force in 2022. Japan's economy is fairly intertwined with the economies of Australia and New Zealand, and while the USA and the EU represent large trading blocs likely to make big unilateral decisions, the marginal impact of, let's say, disruption in Australia's currency or trade terms is unlikely to be as great. In fact, it's likely to be far less because it's a relatively smaller country, at least in population terms. So the benefits to Nintendo of selling there is likely greater due to trade terms and the risks of the loss being lower due to the population. As for South Korea, this is a country with a strong base of Nintendo support, but relationships between the Asian nations have not always been favourable. In recent years, though, tensions have thawed, with South Korea restoring Japan to preferential trade status for many goods and Japan agreeing to follow suit. If it's true that the Switch 2's chip is from Samsung as well, then it may well be that for strategic reasons they wish the Switch 2 to have a big profile in the country. Samsung is a South Korean company, and it has to give Nintendo a lot more leverage with Samsung if they have a large domestic consumer base. Sure, Samsung operates internationally, but they too benefit from the relative stability of a domestic market in less certain times. Most of this is supposition, of course. Nintendo isn't going to come out with a bullet point list of its reasons, and nor should they, particularly as these are essentially business decisions and the rationale they use is market sensitive. Still, if Nintendo can build a very strong and secure base in Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, it doesn't empty the options box for the rest of the world going forward. They can adjust their prices in response to events. What then of Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden? These have in common that Nintendo stock is provided by a regional distributor, Bergsala, and while normally I would look at a larger range of causes, given the diversity of these areas, it makes superficial sense that Bergsala themselves would be the cause. These four markets are more different in certain respects, due not just to language barriers, but in some cases the very large areas to travel, making it probably beneficial to Nintendo to have the specialist knowledge of a local distributor as opposed to building up their own infrastructure in these markets. Bergsala, as a consequence, will have some operational independence to increase charges, and it would make sense that they have done so here. Still, it's not in their interest to penalise a market that they are reliant upon, so I don't necessarily know that we can put all of the blame for these price changes at Bergsala's door. And before we finish this thought on Bergsala, I remind you of the comments I made at the top of the video concerning the difficulties of supply to the US market. Because of the uncertainty around the imposition of tariffs, Nintendo needs to stand ready to prioritize US supply at short notice. Where does Nintendo magic up a goodly supply of Switch 2 consoles? Well, in regions that it supplies internally, there is not much of an issue. They can simply divert supplies centrally in order to reflect their changing conditions on the ground. But when working with a distributor, there are contractual issues that make life a lot harder. My hunch, therefore, and it is just a hunch, so you can judge for yourself if it rings true, is that Nintendo have drastically limited their guaranteed supply to Bergsala in order to protect their supplies in other markets. This gives them the option to release more supply at a later point to Bergsala, but doesn't contractually bind them to supplying those consoles if it becomes difficult to do so. Bergsala therefore is caught between selling at a lower price and running out very quickly, incurring the anger of customers in the medium term, which would make their balance sheets also look dreadful, or raising the prices now so that demand naturally constricts in response to the higher cost of the machines, allowing them to regularize their cash flow over the coming period. Again, if Nintendo is able to offer a good supply of consoles, things will become a lot easier, and I think therefore that these regions could well see a price decrease if and when the global markets and production realities start to tilt in Nintendo's favour. So, what next? I would guess this largely relies on how trade terms settle. A trade arrangement between the US and Vietnam, which favoured consumer electronics, would be the optimal situation for Nintendo and consumers this year. Without one, Nintendo has historically responded to regional price pressures by adapting their prices, usually around January to March. Therefore, I would say that the current prices, with the exception of the Bergsala supplied regions, are likely to stay in place. But even then, changing global trade patterns will involve adjustment costs, which will have knock-on effects that are almost impossible to fully foresee, and so it could be that there are more abrupt changes. For now, though, thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Please do check out the Patreon for more, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.